Why, hello there. I hope you're doing well today. Kind of feel like I wish it was still the weekend. I'm not ready to be back at work. Um, okay, so today we're going to talk about a 2024 book by Haruki Murakami, um, and it's called The City and Its Uncertain Walls. I picked this book because of the coffee Discord where there's a pretty active book discussion, and I'm pretty sure Murakami has been recommended by a number of different readers there, and he's got a specific style that they seem to enjoy. Honestly, I hadn't really heard of him before then, but I think that's more a reflection of me and what I generally read rather than his popularity. I mean, this book was considered a national bestseller. He's been writing for over 40 years. I think he's a pretty well-known Japanese author. I mean, his books have been translated into 50 some languages. So I definitely think it's a miss on my part rather than a him being an unknown. I think this book is interesting because, and I think part of the reason why I haven't heard of him as much is this book definitely falls into like that magical realism type of genre that Love in the Time of Cholera fell into, and I definitely found some similarities between the two. I think that Murakami also found similarities between Love in the Time of Cholera and this story because he originally wrote this as a short story novella in 1980. It was one of his first pieces of fiction, and the Love in the Time of Cholera was published in '85. And clearly, he read the book because he quotes a portion of it from the very end of the book where Femina, Daza, and Florentino are on this boat at the very end, going up and down this river, and they see the spirit of a woman who drowned, and I think that there was the reason why that was pulled in was very intentional about calling calling attention to both the similarities and differences between the books because I think there's significant differences. I definitely think that the main male protagonist in Love in it or in the City and Its Uncertain Walls is a much better person than Florentino. I think he was. I still think that he was a horrible person. I don't really want to dig into that too much because that's really like I've already talked about Love in the Time of Cholera, and I think it's more interesting to kind of look at this from a different perspective of cities as a character because there's a couple cities in this book that are really significant characters, and I think that while there is a ton that you could talk about with these two books where the main characters were kind of obsessed with one person, they loved them throughout their entire lives, but they went about things differently, and both of them were somewhat damaged by their obsession, and it limited the ability of them to make connections in the broader world. So I think that the main character of the book I identified in some ways personally because he's a huge reader. There are large portions of his life where he spends by himself without many friends reading. And there was a time whenever I was in middle school over summer where I had a big fight with a bunch of my friends over something probably stupid and video game related that I didn't really spend much time with them. And I've read a ton over that summer. And it kind of, in some ways, changed a lot of my personality because I continued to do that afterwards. And there was a sense of loss and loneliness from that. And I definitely feel that loneliness in a lot of ways still. And I know that it's weird considering I play video games with friends all the time. I'm I talk to people at work. My wife is here most of the time. She travels a lot for work, but it's not like I'm alone. I still have that strange sense of a loneliness, though, that I've never been able to pinpoint why I have it. And the main character of this book has that same sense of aloneness, sense of apartness from kind of the rest of the world, and not necessarily using books as a way to escape the loneliness, but using books because they they just like the reading, the joy of reading, and the joy of that sort of adventure. I don't know. It just struck me as something that was pretty interesting. I mean, right now, despite me talking about playing video games with my friends and talking with people at work, I'm really isolated with my health. I am, this past week has been really rough. Like last week, I went upstairs to get a package, and I felt my blood pressure drop, and I didn't really recover until after I went to my medicinal phlebotomy, and like my blood pressure was like 20 points lower than what it normally is whenever that started. And then it gradually started to rise as I was losing blood, which is always interesting. That's kind of the situation I'm in. I went outside to grab another package today, and it just was like I got punched in the face, and it just makes me feel very alone in this condition. But I think in this book it kind of felt like the main character chose his loneliness. He was, whether it was an intentional choice or not, he sabotaged relationships, which resulted in him not being married. He said that he had multiple. The character tells us these things. We don't really know, and he doesn't really give us insight into what happened in those events. He's so hyper fixated on this relationship that he had from whenever he was 16 to 17, and this unnamed girl was 15 to 16, and she disappeared whenever he was 17. And I think it's implied that he doesn't know, but I think it's implied through the story and what happens to Shadows. The girl says she's a shadow of herself, and her real self is residing in this city with these really old walls that are made of really hard material that never age, and a very strong gatekeeper. And time doesn't matter in the city, and that the only clock in the entire city has no hands. And I whenever I first bought the book on Kindle, it had one book cover, which was the hardback cover, and I really like it because they're them holding hands, which I presume is the unnamed girl and the unnamed protagonist. Those are the hands of time, and their hands are frozen at this 150 time. And I think that represents where the girl was, is that she was frozen in time at this. Time didn't pass for her. And then whenever, in a lot of ways, the boy, he was stuck in that time too. And in a way, you can almost argue that it was a traumatic event, him losing her, because she disappeared. And maybe she wrote him one last message as a goodbye, which could be, construed as maybe she died, maybe she died, maybe she moved and lost contact. So in a way, he treats it as a traumatic event, and he never gets over it. And so they're both kind of stuck. But I think that the reason why I call this this town character is because it does reach across this boundary from this different world that it's in from to our world where it pulled in the nameless protagonist into it. So he had to injure his eye so he could be a dream eater. And there's another character later in the book that is drawn in the same way, but they aren't the only people that have heard of this town, and or the fact that the the dead can recognize that people have lost their shadows, which could be another way of describing that they should, maybe the shadow is a soul and they're dead and their body's gone and their soul's lived on. There's lots of ways that you could interpret it. And I think that in Love in the Time of Cholera, the town where it takes place is also pretty important in terms of like a character, because it drives so much action between all the major characters in it. It is central to how they all grow over time. I think books like The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin really, really takes us to an extreme, where literally the city, parts of the city, become characters. In that book, there's 5 characters that represent New York, one for each of the boroughs, and they are people, and they go by their name as Brooklyn, Manhattan. This is another book that I bounced off of, but I think I bounced off of it in a different way than I bounced off of Works that I talked about last week. And that's because it felt like such a love letter to New York City. And I didn't have the context to really be able to enjoy that aspect of it, that it just felt very alienating in a way, I guess. I mean, I've been to New York once, so and that was mostly to Manhattan and going to see Broadway shows with AP English when I was 18, so like forever ago. So I just didn't feel a connection with the book, and I just bounced off of it. I think that there's a big group of people that would love it. So if you like New York City, you've been to New York City a lot, visited different parts of the city, I think it's a book for you. But it wasn't for me, and I'm kind of bummed about that, because I love the idea of a cosmic horror, where cities are alive and they actually, they can learn from each other. Like Sao Paulo is up in New York City, like the physical place, trying to make sure that the people who are the city are safe, and that they're not being, they're not being targeted by this entity that's out there. I thought that was such a cool idea, and it just didn't resonate with me for whatever reason. But which is really crazy, because I read The City in the City by China Miéville, and which is a completely made up city that I fell in love with. I loved the city in that book, and there was there was such a same similarity in like the way that it was described. And maybe it was because he introduced that city as, because no one else is going to know it. You have to bring the audience with you, and with New York City, because it's a real place and you're writing it as a love letter to it, you can just start talking about different places and say, this is this place here, and describe it. And you don't really need to provide a lot of context if the people that are reading the book are from New York City. And there's a big audience in New York City that would probably love the book. I mean, bestsellers are not huge number of books. Like having 100,000 people from New York City buy it and love it would make it a bestseller probably. But like The City in the City is interesting, because in that book you have, I kind of feel like it's an exaggerated version of Berlin, but it's also in the same way magical realism, where this city, you're not allowed to there. It's like interwoven with two cities are interwoven together. Kind of like, the streets are kind of like this, where it's a hatch like this, where parts of it are one city, and the next house over might be in the different city. But if you live in one city, you're not allowed to see anything in that other city. It's really confusing at first, and it takes a while for you to understand it. If you're interested in it, there's a show that you can watch on Amazon where they go through kind of, they do an all right job kind of explaining it and what the characters are supposed to do in the world, and how everything is unfocused whenever you're not supposed to be looking at things. And what if you cross from one city to the other without following the proper protocols, like you were snatched off the street, and you had really significant repercussions. And that way, there's similarities with the city and its uncertain walls, where you cannot go into the city with your shadow, and if you are, you're forcibly ejected, or the gatekeeper could kill you, or any number of things. And it just felt really, really peaceful in that city. Like it felt like it was a refuge for the main character from his loneliness. Sure, he was able to meet the girl of his dreams, but she was 16 again, and he was a 45-year-old man. And so she was still just as far away as if she if she wasn't even there. Which is why I think the book ends the way that it does, which is I think is interesting. And the reason why I want to talk about this book and with the context of these other books is that I'm talking about books with a very specific sort of context. I pick one book and say I'm going to have these two books in conversation, and I make up some sort of way that they talk to each other. But I think that every book has multiple ways that you can do this, and that any one book is an option for that, and that you should try and find your own books that resonate in that way. Fiction and fiction, or nonfiction and fiction, or nonfiction and fiction, they all provide different contexts around things. And the next book that we're going to discuss, the next books that we're going to discuss is a pair of fiction and nonfiction. But there's a lot of ways that you could go with that, because of the subject matter, what the book, yeah. And I think that this book is another good one. I mean, I could have talked about tragedy or trauma, and how, like, with The Body Keeps Score, or the loss of a loved one, what that can do to people, and how it can scar people for years. Or the Love in the Time of Cholera. There's a clear connection. I mean, there's a passage quoted in this book. So Murakami definitely saw that these books were in conversation with each other, which is cool. But of course, you don't have to listen to what the author thinks either. You can say, you're wrong with how you're interpreting your own book. I'm going to interpret it this way. I think that I also thought about interpreting this book through the lens of Piranesi or Library of Mount Char. Piranesi would have worked really well, because there's multiple different types of libraries in this, like a real library, a dream library, a library in somebody's head. There's him working as a book distributor. So just all these different aspects that you can look at a book. And I love that about books and media in general, is that they're never one-dimensional, and everybody can interpret them differently and get different things out of the same books. And I hope that you take the opportunity to read The City and Its Uncertain Walls. Tell me what you think about it. Did you like it? You know, which cover did you like? You know, did you like the hardback cover or the ebook cover better? I personally like the hardback cover better, but I think it's interesting the ebook version. I did not like that my Kindle changed the version on me without my consent. It's a serious problem with Kindle. I probably would have bought it on bookshop.org if it had been released there at the same time, but it hadn't. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good day, and thank you for watching. Please leave a comment if you've read the book. Leave a comment if you've read any of the other books. If you think I should give, the city or the city we became another try, I might consider doing that and maybe talk about that with another book. So again, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.